My name is Karen Neurohr with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Thursday, February 28, 2008, and I'm at the OSU Library in the Angie DeBow Room of the Special Collections and University Archives, interviewing Dr. Max Craighead.
I'm sorry. That's not
Doctor. Okay, I'm sorry.
I remember
Mr.
reading where I could interrupt sometimes.
Okay.
So.
Okay. This interview is being conducted as part of O State Stories, an oral history project of the OSU Library. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Craighead.
Thank you.
All right. I would like to start our interview today by finding out a little bit about you, where you're from originally.
I was born and reared in Buffalo, Oklahoma. Born on a farm, little 3-room house out northwest of town. And when I was 5 or 6, we moved into town because my dad's wheat crop was hailed out and he had to go to town and get a job, making a living for the family. And then we lived in Buffalo until I graduated from high school. In fact, I was the only boy, along with 5 girls, who had started in the first grade and graduated 12 years later. Of course, there were only about 30 in my class.
Where is Buffalo exactly?
Buffalo is in Harper County, which is the county that the Panhandle joins onto in extreme northwestern Oklahoma.
Okay. And where did you go to school after you graduated from high school?
From high school, I had no real plans, but my best friend was going to school at Oklahoma Baptist University, and we were active in the Baptist church at Buffalo together and had gone all through 12 years of school together. So I just followed him to OBU. I had no idea what any kind of career plans. And after 2 years, I decided it was time to quit and do something else where I could get a little direction in my life. So I worked a year, and then the Korean War started, so I joined the Air Force and spent 4 years in the Air Force, and then worked another several months because my wife and I got married shortly before I got out of the Air Force. And then I started at Oklahoma A&M in 1955 and was here when the name change took place. So I always say I went to Oklahoma A&M, graduated from Oklahoma State.
And what were you majoring in?
Forestry, all the way.
All the way.
All the way. I decided on a career, and it kind of doesn't seem normal probably because as you probably know, when you're in the military, you don't make too many decisions for yourself. You just go where they say go and do what they say do. Well, instead of going to Japan or Korea, I was sent to Germany, and then from Germany on down to North Africa at Tripoli, and spent 2 years overseas of my 4-year enlistment time. And then came to Oklahoma A&M following military service.
Okay, so your bachelor's degree is what's?
Is in forest management.
Okay.
Forest management. I think that probably was the only option we had in the real early days of the department. They've added a number of options since then, but forest management was the degree at that point.
And who were some of your professors that you remember?
Well, I feel very privileged to have known the 3 original faculty members who initiated the forestry department in 1946. Mr. Glenn Durrell, who was a graduate of Iowa State University, was called on by the governor to come to OSU and start a forestry school. He was a state forester in Oklahoma City at that time and had worked in southeastern Oklahoma prior to that. So he came to Oklahoma State. This was Dr. Henry Bennett, one of our more famous administrators. But he came to Oklahoma A&M in '46 and to set up and begin the forestry school. And then one of his original faculty members was Dr. Michael Afanasiev. And Dr. Mike, as we all lovingly referred to him, was a citizen of Russia and was in fact in the White Russian Army during the revolution. And his wife was actually a Russian princess. And so they were a very unique, very interesting, lovable couple. Dr. Mike had come to this country and then had gotten his doctorate. I don't believe it was a PhD, but it was a doctor of forestry, I think. I'm not positive about that, at Cornell. And then he was teaching, I think, in the botany department here at A&M when the department was established. And then the other original faculty member was Mr. Nat Walker, who later got his PhD. And he lived here in Stillwater until he retired and then later passed away. But he had worked for the U.S. Forest Service in Colorado, and then he came to Oklahoma, I think in 1942 or 43, somewhere along there, as Assistant Extension Forester, a position that I then held later on. And then when the department was formed in 46, they transferred him over to teach in the department. So those were the three original faculty members. Some of the early time faculty were, I came here in 1955, so it had been, department been going for 9 years at that point. And those three were on the faculty, of course. Then we had Dr. Jim Gilligan, who taught silviculture, and he was in the Air Force Reserves, and he later was in Washington, D.C., and I've heard that he was Assistant Undersecretary of the Air Force for a while, but he was here. And then Mr. Al Paluca, but no, not Paluca, Pakula, sorry, Pakula, had come here from the Dirks Corporation, Dirks Force in southeast Oklahoma, and he taught some of the wood courses. And so those five, then probably one of the most important people in the whole department was Mrs. Mary Glover, and she was the departmental secretary, the only secretary we had. And in fact, the Forestry Department office was on the second floor of Whitehurst. Just as you go up the stairs on the west end, then it was right ahead of you at over in Whitehurst. And I'll get into where our classes were located and so on if you want me to. But we didn't have, of course, all the buildings that we have now. The corner where Ag Hall is now, all three wings of Ag Hall, was part of the chicken farm. And there was a big chicken wire fence all the way around that whole corner. And then there were a lot of little gray A-frame huts for chicken houses just scattered all over that. And then to the west, where about the intersection that comes down from, that joins into Farm Road at in front of the Colvin Center, right in there. I guess that's where Kerr Drummond is now. Is that correct? Anyway, the two big dormitories that are left. Mm-hmm. No, the Kerr Drummond is gone, isn't it?
No, it's still here.
It's still here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, then it was Wilhelm dorms, the big ones further west. And right at that intersection there was the old dairy barn. And it was not a very big building, but it was the original dairy barn for the campus. And it still had a silo, and it still had silage in the silo, which became a little rank at times. And we had a room that extended off to the south. And And it was just one room with a couple of big rooms with desks in it and offices, a couple of offices in the back and the storerooms. And we had all of our classes, all of the forestry classes in that room out there in the old dairy barn. And it was quite a hike from there to some of the classes on campus. And if somebody held you over a little bit, you just barely could make it or maybe not make it to the next class on time. And but because you had to go around the chicken farm when they waited to get through like we can now. But the old dairy barn has a lot of history and a lot of memories from people who went through out there. Ag engineering had the front part of the building and forestry had the back part.
Okay, that is interesting, and the campus certainly has changed since then a lot.
A whole lot,
Yes.
Sure did.
Well, when you finished with your bachelor's degree, then what did you do?
When I finished bachelor's degree in 1958, well, to back up just a little bit, we always have a spring forestry awards banquet, and that year we happened to have it at the Elks Lodge, which is still located over on McElroy, just east of Main Boomer. And I remember the dance was in progress, and Mr. Durrell, the head of the department, and 3 or 4 others of us were sitting up on the stage watching people dance. Because I couldn't dance, and neither could my wife, so we just sat around and watched other people have a good time. But we were sitting there talking, and just kind of out of the blue, Mr. Durrell said, "Max, how would you like to be the next extension forester?" Well, I didn't know what an extension forester was. So Mr. Rigdon was the extension forester, or had been, and the only one that had ever been employed at A&M at that time. And he had retired a year earlier. So I began to look around and talk to Mr. Rigdon a lot, talk to everyone I could. You know, what are the duties of an extension forester? What do you do? I was so naive, I didn't realize that 4-H was a part of a program sponsored by Oklahoma A&M, and although I'd been in 4-H for a while as a kid, but I just wasn't aware of all the implications. But anyway, I found out what it was like and what the duties might be, and I decided that that'd be pretty interesting. Well, I already had a telegram from the U.S. Forest Service offering me a job on the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas. And that's the only thought I'd ever given to a career was U.S. Forest Service. That's just where most of the graduates went at that time. Only most of them went west to where the big trees are and all the glamour of forestry, supposedly. But I'd always been inclined to want to work in the South anyway, and had worked in the South as a student one summer. Back then, I guess I shouldn't say it was a requirement, but it was the next thing to a requirement that everybody spend at least one summer working for a forest industry or the U.S. Forest Service or someone before they graduated. And so I had worked in Alabama and thought I'd wanted to work in the South. And so I looked into the job of extension forester as much as I could and found out that it was a federal job also. I'd have civil service, the same as with the Forest Service. And if I wanted sometime, I could transfer to the Forest Service without any loss of time or anything. So the job was appealing to me because I remembered I had interviewed with a representative of International Paper Company who had said, "I don't really have any jobs to offer, but we have good feelings and have had very good luck with people, with our foresters we've hired from Oklahoma A&M, and we want to maintain contact with the school because we're going to have jobs in the future." Well, as I was interviewing with him, I thought, this might be the kind of job I'd like. I I wanted to work in the woods, but I wasn't interested in just being out there all the time, and I didn't want to be in the office all the time either. So that seemed like a good trade-off, and an extension appealed to me from the same aspect. So I took the job, graduated in about the middle of May, and took the job starting June 1. Dr. Luther Brannon was director of extension at that time. And as I interviewed with him for the job, he said, we're starting a new program. We want to give our state specialists, which the job I would have been hired for, we want to give our state specialists some experience in the county, because the county office is where it's all at. That's where the real crux of extension takes place. And so he said, we want you to go to Delaware County, with the county seat is Jay. And that's right on the Arkansas line in extreme eastern Oklahoma. So which was a far cry from where I'd grown up, spent all my life in Buffalo at western Oklahoma. So I went to Jay and spent 1 year there working in the county agent's office. I've always said it was one of the best years I ever had, and then was moved back to Stillwater to begin my job as assistant extension forester.
So let me ask a question then. When you were sent up to that area, that was a brand new initiative that they were starting at that time?
Yes, and it continued for a few years with some other state specialists that were hired, and then they discontinued the practice for some reason. But it gave me an insight as to what extension is really all about, because if you know nothing about it except from the state aspect, serving all 77 counties, then I think you lose out a great deal. And I've always felt like that year in Jay really prepared me for a lifetime in extension.
What qualities do you think that he saw in you that he steered you in that direction?
I've wondered about that a lot of times. Probably one thing was that I was older. I was 29, I guess, at that time. Of course, there were a lot of veterans in my class from the Korean War, but most of them had gone into the service relatively soon after high school, and I had 3 years after high school and then another year of work before I ever joined the Air Force. So I had some age and experience. And then I've always felt like one of the main reasons was I had a good wife. I've always felt like that, well, she and Mrs. Durrell were very close, very good friends. And I just thought that Mr. Durrell thought she could guide me through it all. So I really feel like it was, a lot of it was because of her.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really some great background information on that. And let's just, I guess, keep going chronologically here and continue on then.
All right. In Jay, that very first summer, in fact, only a couple of weeks into my employment, which I started on the 1st of June, about the middle of June was the date for the Oklahoma Youth Forestry Camp, which was held at Beavers Bend State Park in southeastern Oklahoma, near Broken Bow. And the only extension forester at that time was Mr. Lee Clymer, and he was stationed at Antlers because Mr. Rigdon had retired 2 years earlier than that, by that time. And so I gathered up 4 boys from Delaware County, and we went to Youth Forestry Camp down at Beavers Bend. Had a great time and a great experience. And there I got to know Mr. Clymer, who became one of my dearest friends and like a second father to me. And had it not been for Lee, I'm not sure how things might have gone, because he steered me through a lot of difficult times. I know one time I was getting a little discouraged because in fact, at that time, all the state specialists were housed in Gardner Hall, which is now the
Art Center and.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
right. And it had been a girls' dormitory originally. And my office was up on the 4th floor and had a little dormer window about so wide, no air conditioning, no way for the air to circulate even. Had a wooden chair, had a crack in the center. If I moved just right, it'd pinch me on the leg. But, it was a good beginning. I did have a fan to blow the hot air around a little bit. But I was getting a little discouraged because it seemed like nobody ever asked me a question that I could give the answer to. I thought I'd been through school and I had a degree. I ought to know something about forestry, but nobody ever asked me anything that I felt like I could give them a definitive answer for. So I went down and I talked to E.K. Lowe, who was the assistant director of Extension. And I told him my problem. And he put his hand on my shoulder in a fatherly way, and he said, well, no need to be discouraged at this point. He said, I don't think in the history of this organization or of Extension anywhere, you'll find where anybody was fired for saying, I don't know, particularly if they added, but I'll find out for you. And so that meant a lot to me. I found that I could say no, but I'll find out for you, and that we worked through a lot of times that way.
That's a good lesson. But
Mr. Lowe taught me that lesson.
Did he have a connection with Edmund Lowe, whom the library is named for?
I don't think so. He originally was from Guthrie and had been a county agent and then worked his way in, but I do know of Edmund Lowe, mm-hmm. The library connection. But there's some great people. I need to tell you another little incident that impacted my thinking a little bit. I smoked cigars at that time. I always had a Roytan in my pockets and smoking them. And I went in for my interview with Dr. Brannon, and Dr. Brannon smoked cigars also, but he chewed on them more than he smoked them. And he'd smoke it a while and then it'd go out, and so he'd just chew on it. We were sitting there in the interview, and he had one of those big old wide desks. It's a double desk, had drawers on both sides so two people could work at the same desk. And he leaned back in his chair and we were visiting. He was twirling that cigar around and he stuck it in his mouth, but he stuck the burned end in his mouth. And having been a cigar smoker, I've done that myself, and I know what it tastes like. And it's awful. Spit and sputter, try to get all those ashes out. He didn't blink an eye. He just sat right there and went right ahead with the interview, just like he had a stick of gum in his mouth. And I thought, oh boy, everybody has that much self-control. I think maybe I'd like to work for him.
So what kinds of things were you doing with that job at that time?
Well, one of the things was at the state level, you have a lot of responsibility, and your responsibilities vary a great deal depending on the part of the state you're working in. Because in Oklahoma, most people don't even think of Oklahoma as having much forest land or being a forested state. So, because most of the real commercial forestry is located in southeastern Oklahoma. But there's a great deal of other types of forestry work all through the central part of the state, what we call the cross timbers. And then in the western part of the state, we have a lot of windbreaks and shelter belts and wildlife plantings. And back then, even we did a lot of plantings for posts to produce fence posts later on. And the trees, the seedlings, were grown by the State Division of Forestry, and they had two foresters out in the field to assist people. And then my job was from the educational standpoint. And so, like I say, it varied from commercial forestry to western plains forestry. Um, One of the things that helped me quite a lot there was I was involved with the Great Plains Forestry Committee, which was a part of the Great Plains Agriculture Council. And I understand that no longer exists, the Forestry Committee. But got to interact with people from Texas and New Mexico up and including Canada, all through the Great Plains area of the United States. And we met annually and had excellent programs and good attendance, and I got exposure to what happens in other parts of the country there. So there was the plains forestry, and then the commercial forestry. Mr. Lee Clymer was the other extension forester, and he was located in Antlers down in the southeast part of the state. And that's where he wanted to be, and he didn't want to come to Stillwater under any circumstances. And he was a very highly respected forester, both personally and professionally. He was a wonderful man. But he passed away in 1977, I believe it was. And up until that time, he had been the director of the Youth Forestry Camp, which he and Mr. Rigdon had started in 1956 at Beaver's Bend. And he'd been the director, and then when I came along, I became the assistant director. So then I think it was 1974 that his health precluded him being able to continue on an active work schedule. And so that's when I took over the forestry camp. And
Was that a week-long camp?
it was a week-long camp
Mm-hmm.
for boys only from 14 through high school, just high school age.
Several sessions
boys.
held during the summer, or just one session?
Just one session of a week long.
Mm-hmm.
And we would accept 65 boys, and every year for I don't know how many years, but many years, we had way more than enough than we could accept. There were times when we had enough applications to have held 2 camps, but we didn't have the resources to hold 2 camps.
And did the boys pay money to come to the camp?
They didn't pay anything for the first couple or 3 years, but we found that with the popularity of the camp and the number of applications we had, that sometimes kids would decide, well, they couldn't come or they were going on a vacation or something, so they'd drop out, and then that would leave us with a short number and omit kids who could have come. So we started charging a fee, $3, and that made a big difference. And then we had to go up over the years. I think about the time I retired, we were charging $25 for the week. But now that didn't cover very much of the costs. The forest industries of southeast Oklahoma supported the camp very, very well. All of the industries, we just write a letter and here'd come a check.
So you didn't really have to fight for funding?
No, we didn't. We didn't have any extra money, but we had enough to get along each year because the industry supported us too so well. I was invited back a year ago to the camp, a year ago in June, I think it was, and it was the 50th anniversary of the camp. I could hardly believe that, but it seemed like they told me that the registration fee now was either $150 or $175. $175. So, which is a far cry. And about late 60s, early 70s, we started having girls. They applied, and we never did do anything to encourage it, but when the first applications for girls came in, we accepted them, and everything went very well. Of course, it was a whole new ball of wax for us because we'd been used to only boys all those years, and but we got along just great, and the girls added a really good dimension to the camp. And in fact, we had prizes. We had classes every day, and we'd put them on trucks in the morning and send them out, a third of them, to 3 different locations, and then rotate Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So by Thursday night, they'd all been in the same place and done the same thing, had the same instructors and the same set of exams. And then on Friday, we took all of them on a tour of the industries in the area. So then the grades were all tallied up, and in conjunction with their regular camp conduct and how things had gone through the week, then we chose an outstanding camper, and down the line about 10, because we had a lot of nice prizes that were donated for the outstanding campers. And there were a few of the campers who came on to OSU and majored in forestry. But that was not really our prime purpose in the camp. We felt like if we could help some camper decide not to go into forestry, that was just as important as helping them decide to choose forestry. Because if we can be influential in some way in helping them make a career choice, and that was really what the camp was all about. And we had excellent adult leaders. The county agents would come with their kids, OAG teachers and parents, and we required that every cabin have an adult leader in it, and we had a good camp. It went along very, very well.
Were there any students that come to or campers that come to your mind that maybe came to school here or whatever that you feel like that you're especially proud of, that kind of thing?
I could think of one, and Craig may know him, Steve McIntyre. I thought you would. And he went ahead and completed had a career in forestry. In fact, I saw him at our forestry reunion at Broken Bow a couple of years or so ago, and I believe he was retired, but he had been a career forester as having gone there. Then there was another young man in that very first group that I took from Jay, and his dad was a VOAG teacher, and gosh, his name slips me right now, but he went ahead with a career in forestry also. And there were a few others who did also.
Okay, well, explain if you could the connection. You were working in extension, but they had the forestry department here at the university, and if there was interaction between the 2 different groups and that sort of thing.
Well, Oklahoma State University is a land grant university, of course. And the 3 main arms of the university are research and teaching and extension. So the research and the teaching basically take place on campus. Extension is extending the university to all 77 counties of the state. And of course, there are extension programs campus-wide in business and engineering and education and home economics and so on. They have their extension programs, but the agricultural extension service is an arm of the USDA, and so we have the same benefits in extension that regular civil service employees have. But our job was to take the research that was developed by the faculty, and if necessary, rework that into layman's terms, whatever, and then take that out on a practical basis to the landowners and help them with their management programs of their forest land and some of the small industries. We have a lot of sawmills, little sawmills around. But I was so naive when I first started. I didn't realize that that Glenn Durrell in the Forestry Department was my boss, because he was the head of the Forestry Department, and I just assumed that Extension was where my loyalties lie. Well, they did, but it was through Mr. Durrell, because he had a part-time Extension appointment also. But all of the agricultural extension is tied very, very closely to the departments. And for the first 5 years, I was located over in Gardner Hall. And then in '64, when Dr. Burr Ross was the Dean of Agriculture, the decision was made that all of the extension state specialists would be moved over to and housed with their respective departments. So I was moved over to Forestry Department at that time. I know Mr. Durrell thought that was coming, but nobody knew when. And we were in Extension Conference one day, a monthly function we had, and Dr. Ross said, well, if your department head doesn't know that you're coming, you go tell them immediately that you're going to be moving over to their department. So I was in his office, and he said, well, all right, but he says, I don't know where we're going to put you. And I was in his nice walnut paneled office, and I looked around and said, well, this looks pretty nice. But he didn't go for that. I never did get that office. Craig had that office later on. But I don't think I could have chosen anything that I would have enjoyed anymore. I always said that never claim to be most knowledgeable or the most helpful or be the best extension specialist around. But as from my personal perspective, I just never could have spent a career in anything that I enjoyed like I did. And it was all because of the wonderful people that you had to work with, both coworkers and the public.
One thing that I think would be good to talk about a little bit is how the education went out at that time compared to now, and how information is available now and how it goes out. And did you all have discussions about effective ways to get your messages, or to work with people? Were there certain things that I guess kind of made the rounds and they didn't work, and other things came along and did, or anything like that?
Yeah, I feel fortunate to have spent my time when I did, because the technology, I think, would have overcome me that is available now. We had, at that time, way back, we started out with what we called, there were bulletins primarily. You'd select a subject, and then you'd try to cover the waterfront, cover all the material on a subject in a bulletin and of several pages. And then not too long, I think it was when Dr. Gene Evans came as director of Extension, that we switched our information technology or information dissemination method from the bulletins to what we called fact sheets. And so instead of trying to tell the entire story about some subject, you pick out the most important things and you write a 1 or 2 page fact sheet about that. And then there might be several fact sheets that would be similar, but to cover the broad subject. But you could delve more deeply into the subject matter in just a fact sheet. We also did radio tapes, and they would send these tapes out. The Ag Communications Department handled all that, and every month there was a week set up where we'd make appointments, and we'd go over and we'd prepare tapes that were from 2 to 3 minutes long, and then those would be sent out upon request to the county agent's office. They would get a list of everything that was available, and then they would order the ones they wanted. And many of the county agents, most of them, had actual regular radio programs. So the way that operated, they could say, county agent could say, well, this is Craig McKinley. I'm county agent of Hughes County, and this morning we have with us Max Craighead, who's going to talk about so-and-so, and they'd flip the button and your tape would start, and it would appear to be a live interview or discussion right there on the radio. I don't know whether that's still done at all or not. Of course, I retired just about the time the computers were coming on. There were 3 or 4 or a few in our department when I retired, but it was some of the more progressive people, and I knew I wasn't going to be around very long, and so I didn't get one until after I retired, and I've still never learned to use it very well.
And the year that you retired was? 1986.
But their computers were coming into their own about that time, and now then, we relied heavily on secretaries, and when we interviewed for a secretary, being able to take shorthand was a pretty stiff requirement, because that's, and then we also had, later had tape recorders, and I know I carried my tape recorder with me all the time, and I've written a jillion letters on the tape recorder when I was driving back and forth, and then come in, and I never was very good about being able to get one just exactly right the first time through, so secretary would type up a rough copy and then work it over and then get out the final copy of your letters, thank you letters, and all those kind of things.
Did they provide you with a vehicle?
Yes, we checked vehicles out of the carpool, I guess very similar to the way it's done now, or we could use our own private vehicle and they'd pay us mileage. It was 6 cents a mile, 6 cents a day for meals, and $6 for a room. Wouldn't go very far today, but things are different. We made it.
So when you were having to prepare newsletters and the educational materials, and you said that you were using research that the faculty produced, were you interviewing the faculty, or were you reading what they wrote, or was it a combination?
It was a combination, plus just your interaction with them. You would know what research each one of the faculty members were working on, what they were doing. So you keep up with them through just personal contact, and then get the research information and read it. And then what I always did, anything that I redid, of course, you check with the researcher and make sure you hadn't taken something out of context, and that you were really putting into layman's terms what they intended from their research. But it was a combination of all of it. And I wasn't in favor of moving over to the forestry department when they did that, because I thought that the more contact I had with other specialists in other subject matter areas. For example, we had what was called the plant science group, and it was an agronomist and a wildlife person and I can't even, horticulturist and forester and so on. Those of us that dealt with plants were in a group, and we put out publications as a group that way. And so I thought, well, the more contact we had with brought across the board, the better it would be. But I found that contact with the forestry, I was losing out on contact with the forestry department with what was going on there. And so it turned out to be the right thing to do.
Are there any particularly groundbreaking things that you helped distribute information about or educate people about in Oklahoma that come to your mind?
The first thing that comes to mind, is because it was a little spectacular, was that there was a committee assigned, and it was two. We had a gentleman at the time named Ed Roberts, who was a soil conservation specialist, and then we had an agronomist who specializes in grasses and pasture plants, and then me as a forester. And they assigned the three of us as a committee to work on a project using airplanes to fight grass fires. And one of our plant science leader, Gaylord Haynes, was a former employee of the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA, and they had been working with fertilizers, and they'd found that one of them was a good fire, not prevention, but can't think of the word I want, but it would reduce the ability of the plant to catch on fire, whatever I'm trying to say, because it coated the plant, and it takes air and heat and fuel for a fire to occur. So if the plant was coated to where the heat couldn't penetrate and catch the plant on fire, then there wouldn't be a fire. So he was able to get us, I've forgotten how many gallons, but a few hundred gallons of 11-37-0 liquid fertilizer from the Tennessee Valley Authority. And I know I took a pickup and went to McAllister and picked up this great big tank of fertilizer and brought it back. And so then we checked on the crop dusting airplanes that were around the state, and we got everything all ready, and they cooperated great. The planes were not really made or designed for this, but a little adaptation, it worked well. So the first one we did, first demonstration we put on was out at the Stillwater Airport, and the grass was short, and it went real well. And we'd start, what we'd do is go in and cut the grass down with a mower the day before, and then spray it with 11-37-0 fertilizer, and then a boundary all around it. And then we would set the grass on fire, and as it burned, then the airplanes would come swooping in and drop their load of fertilizer on it, and a big blue smoke would go up, and the fire was out, and it was great. So then the next demonstration we had was out at Kingfisher on Irvin Bolenbach's ranch. Had tall blue stem grass, and everybody in the world, it seemed like, showed up out there. There were TV cameras every place, and the wind was blowing, and it was a terrible day for starting a fire. And we almost called the thing off, but Clarence Bunch said, well, we've tried it once, let's see if it'll work. So it was my job to carry the drip torch and set the fire along. So I headed out and set the fire, and the flames started going up. And here came an airplane, swooped in, dropped its load, the fire was all out. And we did that 2 or 3 times, and the television crews got all their film, and everything worked just perfect. Boy, we were patting ourselves on the back. What a great deal that was. In fact, there was a TV news program at that time, one of the more popular ones in the country, and it was the Huntley Brinkley Report. Older people remember Huntley Brinkley. It was as popular as Dan Rather and all of the others are later. But we made that show that night even. WKY sent the film to Huntley Brinkley, and got home. My wife had seen me out there with the drip torch setting the fire and all. So it worked great. Well, we went along and we did a few other demonstrations, and we got down at Duncan, and we were going to try a different thing, and there we were in a pasture of love grass. And anyone that knows about love grass knows it's a real dense, clumpy kind of a grass. It doesn't spread in an even carpet. It's just individual series of big clumps of grass, really dense. So we did all our preparation work, and we sprayed the ground. We mowed a perimeter around it. We sprayed it. Had the airplanes all lined up to dump the fertilizer. And so it was a good day for burning even. So we set it on fire. And we always had fire trucks standing by also. I forgot to mention that. And the blazes went up. Airplanes came in, dropped their fertilizer, and big clouds of blue smoke would go up. Oh, we thought we got it. And here trickled a flame and start just falling right down the row. That fertilizer, that grass was so dense and so heavy that it wouldn't penetrate in to actually put the flame out. So the fire trucks came in, and they were trying to put it out. And I remember these guys working so hard. They had the hoses, and they would go down the fire line, and they would spin the hose around like that. And you'd think it just drowned anything that was there. And about 10 feet behind the firemen, here the flames had started coming again. As a result, we burned off that whole 33-acre pasture that afternoon. But the farmer had said that he didn't care. And I remember he said, go ahead and burn it all off. And when we were getting ready, and I remember Clarence saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to show you how to put out a fire. Well, it didn't quite work that way. But our intent was not to start a program of actually using airplanes. Of course, that's done all over the world now. Airplanes are made specifically for that. That and putting out fertilizer and everything. But it was primarily to draw attention to the problem of grass fires, and that there's more than one way to skin a cat. So airplanes might be part of the answer, maybe not the whole thing. But I think it was very effective from the standpoint of just drawing attention to the problem that we had.
What year was that? Do you remember?
That was, it was about, I think it was a year before I moved to the Forestry Department, so it would have been about 1963, somewhere along in there. Mm-hmm. And we put out a brochure following that called Using Airplanes to Fight Grass Fires, and there's still some of those around, I think.
Interesting. I hope we can get one of those sometime. If we don't have one in the collection, that would be great to go along with your story.
I may have one of those at home. I'm not sure.
That would be wonderful to have.
All right.
Yeah, that was a very
Well, when I got home
story.
from Duncan that night, of course I was still all smoky and charred. My wife said, "Had a little problem today, didn't you?" And I said, "How'd you know?" She said, "Well, you made TV again this evening." Not everything goes just right.
No glory that time, I guess.
That's right.
Okay, we're at about 53 minutes on this tape, so it's going to run out in a minute. Why don't we take a little water break? And
All right.
I'll switch the tape out, and before I start it back up, we can maybe see what in particular we want to cover, and we'll finish up here pretty soon. Okay?
That's right.
We'll do the introduction again. My name is Karen Neurohr with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Thursday, February 28th, 2008. And I'm in the library in the Angie DeBow room of the Special Collections University Archives Center, interviewing Max Craighead about his experiences here with Extension at Oklahoma State University. And I just want to thank you again for being part of our interview process today. And very glad that you're here. And this is the second part of our recording today. And right before I turned the tape on, you said you thought of another story to tell.
Well, thank you. This has been an enjoyable time for me, and some things I hadn't thought of for a long time even. But as I came in today, I knew to start a little bit early, so I came on campus and I started looking for a parking place, and I have a parking permit, of course, but just finding a spot was the problem. So I finally found a place over west of Kerr Drummond dormitories, and a little concerned about parking there because it's in a student lot, but we'll see if anything happens. But I have a permit. Anyhow, as I walked back over toward the Ag Hall and then on over here, I thought of the old tin shed that we used to call it. There was a building about halfway between the Home Ec building and Ag Hall and back to the west just a little bit, and it was just an old tin building, probably 40 by 60 or feet, something. And we kept the old green truck that we went to summer camp in. I had not mentioned that, and the forestry tools and all the equipment and so on. But it was just an old tin building right out there in what now is the middle of the parking lot. And I hadn't thought of that old building for a long time. But that brings up the thought of the old green truck. Now that's one of the things that everybody that ever went to school here in forestry, up through the time that started about 67, I think, was the first time I know of that a bus was used. And normally I didn't go to the regular summer camp with the forestry department summer camp, but I went a few times. And the first time I went was 67, and the camp was held at Sisters, Oregon. And beautiful country, and yeah, beautiful. Stayed in the ski lodge, Hoodoo Ski Lodge at Sisters, Oregon, and they actually rented a school bus from some company out there that time, and that's the first time I know that they didn't use the old bus. But we had an old green Chevrolet bus truck that had stake sides, which were not solid sides. They were just had a board in a space about so wide and loose and rickety, and they'd dump all of us, 30 or so of us, in the back of that old truck, and away we would go every day in summer camp. It's a wonder somebody didn't get killed and all that, but there were a few lost hats and so on. And the brakes went out. I know one time Dr. Mike was driving down in Mississippi, and we were going up and down the hills. But everybody remembers the old green truck, and that's where it was located, down there in that building. And that memory came back as I was walking over here a while ago.
That's a good story too. What about the education of foresters and the way that's changed? Emphases, anything like that?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier that at the time I was in school, there was only one option, and that was forest management. The priority was to produce field foresters, and Oklahoma State and Oklahoma A&M had a good reputation for producing good, hard-working, productive foresters. I remember one time Mr. Durrell told us that there was a representative of the Forest Service coming by on a certain time, and everybody be on their best behavior and so on, because this gentleman, and I don't recall his name or position, but he had said that the Forest Service had such excellent experience with foresters produced from Oklahoma A&M at that time, that he just wanted to come by and see where they came from, because they were out here in the plains. This is not supposed to be where foresters come from, and he just was interested in seeing how those guys were produced, because they had excellent work, and I guess he was pleased because they always had jobs for us.
Were most of the students from Oklahoma?
At that time, I think they were,
Mm-hmm.
and most of them were from rural areas. Good old hard-working country boys.
Do you think that's an Oklahoma trait, maybe?
Well, I'd like to think so. I don't know. I suspect that other people would have the same opinion about people in their areas, but I think that most of us had a good work ethic, and we had worked as kids and had responsibilities and tried to do the best job we could.
You mentioned when the first women started going to the camps and things like that. What else, as far as diversity, women or other people from other cultures and that kind of thing coming into the program? What did you see or experience during your time?
One of the things I noticed right off in our camp was that the girls, like I said, we had tests and grades, and the girls started taking all the top prizes. Well, that kind of was an ego thing that males didn't like to have to admit, but I think they're probably still doing that. I don't know. Then it wasn't until I don't know when, maybe early '80s, that girls started in the regular forestry curriculum in the department. I don't know.
67.
67? Oh, that far back. Okay.
Was the first.
But they've had some excellent women, produced some excellent women foresters who have gone on and done really a fine job for their employers. But that probably stimulated a little more productivity from the men also. There never seemed to be any friction or any problems. It was just simply that I think that the boys realized they were being outdone and tried to keep up. But the type of students that are produced anymore are quite different, I think, from the real early days, because like I said, it was strictly field forester, forest management. And then there are many different options now. I don't even know what they all are, but there have been recreation and economics and wood products and I can't even think of quite a number. So they can broaden their view and still be a graduate of forestry school. I think numbers have gone way down, probably due to economic situation and job availability. And at the time I graduated, most of us had the option of a couple of jobs at least, and I have to choose which one you wanted, and that hadn't existed for quite some time, which has had a definite impact on it. And I don't know, I couldn't prove this, but I suspect there are more urban kids coming into forestry anymore than there used to be, because I know they used to be pretty heavily oriented toward the rural kids.
Well, did the 60s influence anything in forestry in particular?
I'm sorry?
The 1960s, that decade of...
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that I was right there in the department, housed right there in the department all the time, but I wasn't active in a classroom regularly, and so there were a lot of things that I really wasn't privy to that, even though it may have been going on around me, I wasn't aware of all of it.
Let's talk about 4-H a little bit. You had job duties that were related in the 4-H area?
4-H was definitely a part of my job, and a part of my job that I was always very proud of and very interested in. I know there were some state subject matter specialists who felt like 4-H was kind of an imposition on their time and so on, but I never did feel like that. I always felt that was a priority, actually. And I had lots of very good experiences. One of the things I always did, I don't think there was a summer ever went by that I didn't go to from 1 to 3 or 4 4-H camps, because the county's groups would have a camp somewhere in their area, and sometimes 2 or 3 counties would go together and have a camp, and they'd invite me out to present a program on some aspect of forestry or plant life or pressing leaves or that. Then we started I don't know when it was, probably in the 60s, we started a program of 4-H exhibits at the state fairs, county and state fairs. And of course that had to be done from scratch, and we had to write the material and design the different projects and like leaf collections and wood collections and various age groups and all the requirements for each age group and all that. And that's still going on. In fact, I helped Craig, the judge at Oklahoma City and Tulsa Fair this year, or last year in the fall.
What did you notice about the work that the students were doing now?
Well, I always felt like that a fair exhibit was a learning experience. It was an educational opportunity, and they, in our area, of course, they have projects in everything under the sun in 4-H, but we had mostly leaf collections and wood collections, and then we had another project we called self-determined, which was open-ended and allowed the student to use their imagination and develop an exhibit that depicted some aspect of forestry, forest science, forestry education, something that let them develop their own projects. And there have been a lot of urban kids that have gotten involved in that. And one thing that surprised me, normally, and I think this still holds, we would have more exhibits from the kids in the western part of the state than we did from the kids in the eastern part of the state, where there were, forestry was something that was not so foreign to them. But, and I've always thought maybe it was because they had more of an appreciation for the trees. Having grown up in Buffalo, I've been asked a lot of times, how did you ever get interested in forestry, coming from out in that treeless plains? And I tell them, well, when my dad took us kids on a trip to Arkansas one time, and I saw a tree and I liked it. So I just developed a whole career around something that I thought I'd like to do. And I think that there are a lot of kids in the kind of the same thing. Now it's a little different, and it's something that they can actually physically get involved with.
You would have experienced the Dust Bowl days of the 1930s somewhat?
I don't really remember too much about them.
Mm-hmm.
I was 3-4 years old, I guess, when most of that was going on. I remember a few things, and of course, where I lived was hit pretty hard. And in fact, I mentioned, I think, that my dad's wheat crop was hailed out, and he was a tenant farmer, and we had to move to town and him get a job in 1935, 36 maybe it was, anyway, in order to keep the things going. But I'm sure that changed all of our lives considerably. But as far as the individual incidents during the Dust Bowl, I just don't have a great recollection, except my mother would hang wet towels over the windows to try to catch some of the dust and get a little bit of moisture in the air. But other than that, I don't remember much about it.
4-H Roundup is that a statewide activity?
Yes.
And I bet you might have had some experiences with that.
Well, yeah, had some. In fact, last night I went to the girls' basketball game, and I stood out in the lobby and looked at the big 4-H exhibits that's in the east lobby of Gallery Arena. And there were pictures of kids coming to 4-H Roundup, I think in 1932, and they were meeting in a big tent over on between Hanner and Thatcher Hall somewhere, I think it was. But look, there are hundreds and hundreds of kids that were there. So it's been going on for a long time. And And it's a great activity and a great reward for the kids' activities during the year. And I got to go to a national 4-H Congress in Chicago one time, and that was a great experience where the 4-H members from all the cream of the crop from all over the country assembled. And that was wonderful.
And was that when you were in your position as extension?
Yes, as extension forester.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, International Paper Company had a program back then of rewarding a couple of extension foresters each year for, I think it lasted 3 or 4 years and they would bring us in and to the National 4-H Congress, and then that was in Chicago, and they of course paid for everything. And then in the spring, it took us to New York City and to the world headquarters of International Paper Company, and we had a good exposure up there. But that was through 4-H work, that some recognition for work done through 4-H.
What have you seen as far as changes from when you started in the career to when you retired? What were some of the big changes? I mean, you talked about technology a little bit.
Well,
There's some other things that come to mind.
Technology was a big thing. The differences in forest management changed a great deal over that time.
How so?
There were, I'm trying to kind of get it in my mind that there were certain ways. Well, one of the big ways of timber harvesting and early was just selection, individual selection. The individual tree would be marked to cut. Well, that was one of the things I did with the Forest Service in Alabama was go with the timber marker, and he had a paint gun, and he would shoot paint on the tree that was to be cut. And then he would tell me the size of the tree and how many logs and of what size could be gotten from that tree, and then I would record that, and we'd just spend all day going through the woods marking timbers like that. And then there came a time when there were different types of harvesting methods. In addition to the selection method, there was a clear cut method, which received a lot of bad publicity at times, mostly from people who didn't understand what it was all about. But they would cut all of the trees on an area and then plant them back. Weyerhaeuser got an awful lot of bad publicity when they bought Dirk's Forest in southeast Oklahoma. Had I guess close to 1 million acres altogether in Arkansas and Oklahoma, and that was the method of harvesting, and they were accused of being the big company come in from the Northwest and going to just clear the country and then go take all their money and go back, and they didn't understand that before they could even begin to get around over the forest and cut everything, that the newly planted trees would be harvestable, and there was a second forest, and that's what's taken place. And so there's been a great educational program go on there, and they had a lot of problems to start with. There are other methods of harvesting also. The method of utilization of the timber has greatly changed. It used to be that they would take the logs and then all the tops and the slash and the limbs and the thing were just left in the forest, and that created more fuel for fires and so on. But now then they can use everything. Trees were harvested with chainsaws. Cut each one of them down individually. Now they have big equipment with a shear on the front that just snips it off at the bottom and picks it up and runs it through the side and takes off all the limbs and cuts it into proper lengths and stacks it in the back of the machine. And there's things way beyond that have been developed recently. The methods of planting, not the methods, but the used a long time ago nearly everything was planted on a 6x8 spacing, or the rows would be 8 feet apart, and the seedlings would be planted 6 feet apart in the row. Well, at that spacing, that's much too dense when they get to be larger trees, so they have to go back and thin them out. And they found out that they could increase the spacing in various ways and open up the canopy and allow more room for growth. They could, in harvesting, they could take every other tree, and there are just a lot of different methods of doing things now as opposed to just essentially one at one time. The equipment is altogether different. They utilize everything. Products are made from what was just waste in the past.
You mentioned the Cross Timbers area, and Washington Irving came to Oklahoma before it was a state in the 1800s, and he talks about the Cross Timbers area in his book, A Tour on the Prairies.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about the Cross Timbers.
Well, the Cross Timbers is a band of timber from I guess runs almost to the lake states. I'm not sure just how far. It comes down through the central part of the country and down across the central part of Oklahoma and on down into Texas. And for the most part, they're not highly merchantable kinds of trees. In Oklahoma, they're mostly post oak and blackjack, which have value as firewood and lower commercial products. But I've heard a lot of people say that they're more than they provide more than their living space by just holding the earth together, the root systems. And so they do have value, but they're not highly commercial. There are all kinds of other species that grow in those areas, but they're mostly poorer soil sites. Most of them really are not capable of producing a highly desirable kind of commercial product. There's a lot of red cedar, and that has produced many problems, and particularly in recent years, of encroachment on lands. And there are uses for those kinds of products or trees, but the quantity that's available most often doesn't justify the tremendous investment in machinery and equipment to set up a plant to produce a product from them. So it's just not an economical venture.
Okay, are there any other significant experiences or events that occurred during your time here? Any issues stand out in your mind? Did administration get along well with everyone? The town and gown relationships? Anything in particular you can think of?
I think things have gone fairly smoothly, but there have been a lot of different ways to approach things. For example, I can think of one time when I think we only had one or two vice presidents, and the administration decided that we needed a vice president for agriculture and a vice president for business and a vice president for engineering and on down the line. So it created all that, and then later it was determined that might not really be the way to go. So went back to different. I think we have a vice president for agriculture now. Is that correct? But not all the other divisions of the university have them anymore. I don't know whether that creates any friction or not, but I suspect it might a little bit. I know that agriculture has always had a good reputation at Oklahoma State because that's one of the primary functions of the university is much of the extension function is through the agricultural extension rather than the university extension because it's a much larger staff group. But I've always been very proud to be a part of the faculty at Oklahoma State and chose to stay right here when I retired. And my wife would like to move and I don't want to, so far we're still here. But it's been a good environment to raise your kids. And town and gown aspects, I think have for the most part been handled fairly well because both of them have great personal involvement and much to gain or lose one way or another. And for the most part, I think they've worked them out to the benefit of everyone.
Okay, I have another question. You may not even have anything on this, but when you were talking earlier and talking about education of foresters and different things like that, for some reason Smokey the Bear came to my mind. And that whole campaign, and I suspect that you might have a little bit of knowledge about the history of that, and do you?
Smokey Bear originated, let me see, 62, about 61 or 2 or 3 or somewhere right along in there. There was a forest fire in New Mexico, and when the fire was over, a ranger found a little cub bear up in a blackened stub of a tree, and he got him down, and they took care of him, and he went to the Washington Zoo, spent his life there as Smokey the Bear, as original Smokey. In fact, he came through Oklahoma, and we got to see him at Oklahoma City, because at that time, in '62, we put up a forestry exhibit at the Oklahoma State Fair. And remember, Sandy Saunders was the manager of the fair at that time, and he wanted a big forestry exhibit. I'm not sure how this all developed, but it just snowballed. And in fact, we developed, built, and Dirk's Forest at that time, later Weyerhaeuser, just devoted untold man hours, assigned people to work full-time on that exhibit. And we had, 16 separate exhibit areas, and they were something like 18 feet long and 8 feet deep, something like that. In fact, we have a movie of the whole thing, A Forest for Your Future it was called. But I know I made 23 trips to Oklahoma City during the month of September working on that. I'll never forget that. But it was in the Ag building, and it encompassed this whole thing. Then we built a big Smokey Bear to put on a big steel mast section that was outside. And it took 20 sheets of 4 by 8 foot plywood to build that Smokey Bear. And we laid all those plywood sheets out on the floor in the building. And then Bill Watson, who was an illustrator for the extension service here, drew us a Smokey Bear on there to proportion. And then we cut that all out and made it into sections and bolted them together and put that thing up on there. And Harry Russell, who was the originator of the artwork, at least for Smokey Bear, I know he and his assistant spent 6 weeks in Oklahoma City just doing paintings. I'd like you to see, maybe that's something that we could get in this collection. I think I have a set of the slides at home, but I'm not sure I still have one of the movies. But it was really a big thing. But Smokey Bear, I don't know. I've heard that attitudes have changed and maybe kind of outdid his usefulness over the years, but he was very useful for a long period of time in bringing awareness to the fact that forest fires was a big problem, and that people were the primary problem in creating the fires in the first place, and that there was something that they could do about it. But, fire is a good management tool in forestry, and so it's not necessarily all a bad thing. But Smokey Bear brought the forestry profession a lot of publicity over the years at least. And I've had the experience of wearing the Smokey Bear costume several times, and I would not wish that off on anyone. That's a hot.
Why is that?
Oh, it's hot and stinky and big old furry. But kids really get a big kick out of it. Mm-hmm. And that was primarily what it was developed for.
Do you think that had an impact on future marketing or promotion, or coming up with slogans and?
Oh, it probably did, because
like
there was Smokey the Bear, there's Woodsy Owl, there's a one that a forester in southeast Oklahoma, Quintus Heron, developed called Tree Bear. There's another one or two, even I can't think, but I think it had an impact across the board, not just on forestry, but in conservation and awareness.
Okay. What is your proudest accomplishment out of your career?
Well, I haven't been accused of not being able to hold a job. I had that one for 28 years, and I think the fact that I had the good fortune of, through no effort on my own, or no intuition, or no intelligence or anything else from my standpoint, but just the good fortune of having come along at the right time, and the good fortune of being in the right place at the right time to be selected for that position, one which I didn't even know existed hardly, and it turned out to be something that I totally enjoyed. I would hate to be in a position of getting up in the morning and thinking, well, I've got to go into work today, and it's an old boring time. No, I don't think there was ever a time that I didn't look forward to the day, because there was always something different and new people to meet, and new activities to enjoy. And I've always thought that being around the people that I was around was really a blessing, and something that I was very fortunate to have experienced.
Okay, is there anything else you want to add to the interview?
I can't think of anything right now. I would just say that somebody else who experienced these same things may have remembered them altogether different than I do.
Well, this is your interview, so these are your memories.
I'm writing my life history now.
Oh, you are?
And I've been working on it 3 or 4 years. And I'll do a little bit now and then. Mm-hmm. And I've already got a little prologue in there that I disclaimer, but I say that, and that's exactly what I said, that you may not remember these things the way I do, but this is my story, and I'm going to tell it the way I remember it.
I think that's just fine. Do you have anything else you want to cover? Okay. All right. Okay, well,
all right.
I thank you very much. I think
I thank you for the opportunity.
Interview.
It's been fun. I kept trying to think, how can I prepare for this? And I decided there wasn't any way I could prepare.